All right, everyone, settle in. Today, we're putting two major economic philosophies head to head. We're going to dive deep into modern capitalism and Islamic finance, and I think you'll be surprised to find out they have some common ground, a kind of shared moral DNA. So let's get started. So let's kick things off with the big question. Really, the central question for our entire discussion today. Is an economy just a machine for making profit, or does it, and must it, have a moral compass to guide it? This is a question economists and philosophers have wrestled with for centuries, and today we're going to explore two very powerful and very different answers.
So in one corner we have Adam Smith, who you probably know as the father of modern capitalism. Most people know him for The Wealth of Nations, but his earlier work on ethics is just as important. His famous invisible hand was never meant to operate in a moral vacuum. And in the other corner we have the Islamic tradition, where the entire economy is viewed as a sacred trust, an idea guided by divine law, rooted in the Quran and the Sunnah.
Okay, so let's start with Adam Smith. When you hear his name, you probably think of pure, unadulterated self-interest. But honestly, that's a bit of a caricature. We're going to peel back that layer and look at the surprisingly robust moral system that he saw as the real foundation for his economic ideas.
Right. The invisible hand. It's one of the most famous metaphors in all of economics, but it's also one of the most misunderstood. It's not some kind of magic that just makes everything work out. For Smith, it was the natural result of people pursuing their ambitions, but, and this is the key, doing so within a society that was already deeply moral. He actually laid out this ethical framework years before The Wealth of Nations in a book called The Theory of Moral Sentiments. For him, you see, economics and ethics weren't separate subjects. They were two sides of the very same coin.
In this quote right here, this really gets to the heart of it. The engine of Smith's ideal capitalism wasn't greed, it was virtue. He was convinced that for the invisible hand to guide the market toward good outcomes, the people in that market needed a shared commitment to things like justice, fairness, and even benevolence. It wasn't a mysterious force at all, but the logical outcome of a market full of decent, ethical people.
Okay, so now let's pivot to a system where that link between morality and economics is even more direct, even more explicit. In Islamic finance, you see, ethics aren't just the foundation for the economy. You could say they are the entire building.
So, where do the rules come from? Well, it's a pretty clear hierarchy. Everything starts with the Quran, the holy book. Then you have the Sunnah, which are the traditions and practices of the Prophet Muhammad. And to apply these ancient sources to complex modern problems, scholars use something called maqasid sharia, which is basically a way of interpreting the law by focusing on its ultimate goals, its higher purpose, things like promoting justice and social welfare.
Now, if you want to understand Islamic finance, you absolutely have to understand one central concept, and that is the prohibition of riba. What is riba? It's any predetermined, guaranteed, fixed return you get just for the use of your money. In our modern language, we'd simply call it interest. And this single prohibition, this one rule, changes the entire financial landscape.
And this isn't just some vague guideline or a suggestion. It's a core principle stated directly in the Quran. The text draws a very bright line. Trade, buying and selling goods and services, is permitted. But riba, interest, is strictly forbidden. This one rule forces a complete rethinking of how finance, lending, and especially risk are supposed to work.
But this system isn't just about what you can't do. It's really about building a positive framework for ethical business. And the pillars of that framework, as you can see here, are things we'd all recognize. Having secure property rights, ensuring free and open markets, and a huge emphasis on trust and honoring your contracts. The whole thing is designed to create stability and justice.
So, here we are. We have two very different systems, but both, as we've seen, are built on an ethical foundation. So how do they actually play out in the real world? Well, this brings us to the most crucial difference between them, the absolute heart of our comparison today, how they deal with financial risk.
Okay, I want you to pay close attention here because this is the fundamental distinction. Conventional finance, the kind based on interest, is basically an exercise in risk transfer. The whole goal of the lender is to shift as much risk as possible onto the borrower. Islamic finance, on the other hand, is built from the ground up on the principle of risk sharing. The person with the money and the person with the idea, they're in it together.
This chart here really breaks down the consequences. Think about a standard bank loan. The bank gets its fixed interest payment whether the borrower's project succeeds or fails spectacularly. All the performance risk is on the borrower. Now look at the risk-sharing model. Suddenly, everything's different. The financier's return is directly tied to how well the venture actually does. They get a share of the profits if things go well, but they also have to absorb a share of the losses if they don't. It's a true partnership.
So let's make this more concrete with an example. A classic Islamic contract is called a mudarabah. You can think of it as a very old form of venture capital. One person, the investor, provides the money. The other person, the entrepreneur, provides the labor and the expertise. If the business makes a profit, they share it according to a pre-agreed ratio. But if the business fails, the investor loses their capital, and the entrepreneur loses their time and effort. It's a pure partnership of risk and reward.
Okay, let's wrap this up and summarize the main points. First, remember that Adam Smith's capitalism, in its original form, was never meant to be a free-for-all. It was designed to work inside a strong moral framework. Second, Islamic finance isn't just a set of rules, it's a complete economic system built on trust and defined by that central prohibition of interest. And third, and maybe most importantly, the fundamental practical difference between them boils down to their approach to risk. Are you trying to transfer it, or are you committed to sharing it? And that brings me to the final question I want to leave you with today. I'm not going to give you an answer, this is for you to think about. In our modern financial world, a world that seems to lurch from one crisis to another, often fueled by complex and risky debt, is it possible that these ancient ideas about sharing risk could actually offer us a new, more stable path forward? That's your question to ponder. Class dismissed.